Disclaimer: the views expressed on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek are solely the opinions of the host and the guest. The content of the conversation is not reflective of the institutions or establishments mentioned therein. Take all these opinions with a pinch of salt and a dash of lime if needed. Namaskara, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening, and welcome to this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. My guest this week is Anong. Anong and I met each other at Sharda Pre-University College, which was the school I went to in my 12th grade, which is boarding school actually. So that was probably the last time that they and I actually had a full-blown conversation. So a full-blown conversation that we've had together after close to 5 years is what you're going to get to see today. And in this episode, we sort of dive into topics associated with gender, sexuality, sex, and so much more. Anong is someone who's gone through a lot in terms of identifying themselves and even understanding themselves for who they are. So we also talk about the concepts of letting go, education, understanding, and so much more. So I know I say this in every episode, or for every episode rather, but there's definitely a lot to learn from this and a lot to take away as well. So without further ado, I present to you Anong on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. Hey Anong, how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I mean, it's been 5 years since we've spoken to each other, but it's great that we get to do this. So thank you to the internet, I guess. But yeah, before we get started, if you could let everybody know who you are, what you do, things you like, dislike. It can be as mundane as laundry if that's something that you don't like doing. And yeah, future aspirations and whatever you're willing to share.
Perfect. It's been a pleasure to be here, Prateek. I'm Anong. My pronouns are they. I'm a postgraduate research student at the Department of English Literature at University of Birmingham. I currently study post-colonial modernist um, writers, specifically women writers, and um, more towards South Asia and Africa. And yeah, but I'm slowly opening up to new discourses and like new things. In terms of what I like, I think isolation has taught me well that I really like to cook.
Hmm.
Something that I didn't do before. But yeah, that's pretty much yeah.
Cool. Cool. What has isolation been like in the UK?
Well, it was but I kind of experienced it in a very unique way because when I came over here, I had to mandatory isolate from myself for like 10 days in a fancy
Mm,
hotel. And it was kind of unique. But then again,
mm,
things got boring after some time and repetitive. But at the end of the day, you have so much work when you're doing large project that you don't tend to think about isolation that much. Either way, you're in
mm.
isolation, even if it's just a normal, before pre-COVID setting as well. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely make sense. They definitely make sense because you're sort of zoned in on the work that you're doing, that you're technically isolated. So that makes a lot of sense. What got you interested in studying these female writers?
It's a long story. I hope you have time.
Oh yeah, please go for it. The floor
I
is
mean,
yours.
I think you were really part of my life when I had a crisis in 11th grade where I was like, this is not for me. I mean, like, whatever was going through. And I realized that I really wanted to find something that I want to do and like aspire to do, something that I wouldn't find, you know, just I'm doing it because I want, like, someone told me to do it and I want to get it done. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to do something where I could find some sort of um meaning beyond what I was finding, like,
Mm.
what was happening. So what I ended up doing was taking a couple of free courses from Oxford and like Cambridge, and I did a couple of other things. And what I realized that I was really into literature and philosophy. So I had to shift my discourses from science to humanities, and I have been having so much fun since then. It's been going great. I did my bachelor's in literature uh, in Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities. And after that, I got in touch with a couple of supervisors from around the world, and I had a good chemistry with the team I found here. And I was like, you know what, let me give it a shot. And here I am.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, Knowing that we're Indian and like it's quite a conservative culture in the way that it
Right.
approaches education,
Yeah.
and many other things, of course. But in terms of education itself, if we were to touch on that for a little moment, you had to switch your discourse from science to humanities.
Mhm.
Did you have any sort of um, is that what I'm looking for? Did you have any sort of glitches or hitches that made it hard for you to make that transition, or was it smooth sailing?
I would say yes and no at the same time, because
Hmm.
having my parents and my grandparents within the literary discourse for a long time, that kind of helped me get through my childhood. And I was very, very a person who would just sit in the room and read more than the person who would go out and play sports. But what was kind of difficult was that I wasn't practically um, trained to work towards humanities. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
write something, because we came from science background where everything was just you had to memorize it and work through the problems and stuff like that. But having to have uh, a voice of sorts where you could try and work things out critically and creatively was kind of liberating. So I did find a couple of hiccups here and there, but at the end of the day, it was all just helping me identify myself and realize what and where I stand in this world.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. You said something interesting there about how there's a lot of critical thinking associated with it and the creativity aspect. Do you think it's just that whenever we associate, well, I shouldn't say associate critical thinking, but whenever we associate sciences, it's sort of approached as this thing where your brain works the most. I don't know if that makes sense, but at least that's how
Yeah.
it's approached in approached back home. Do you think it's just the lack of people not seeing the fact that it takes thinking wherever you go, be it humanities, science, culture, whatever?
Uh, I kind of think that progressive education, that what I mean by that is liberal arts, basically, where you
Mm-hmm.
can explore as much as possible, as many discourses as possible when you're learning and when you're trying to find what you're interested in, is very important. And that's something we lack, you know,
Mm.
in South Asian education system. Most of the post-colonial education system just is not that. We are still in the hangover of British, the way they did it and the way they handled it. But I think that there are things that are changing. Like now we find so many new colleges and institutions that are offering liberal arts courses, and they are like always on the edge to change and shape the academic style and life, you know as we go. Like they're changing it as new formats come out, as you know science proves that liberal arts has much more effective is a much more effective education system than having a more of a conservative education system. And I think universities are changing that. I think institutions are really putting the effort.
Mm. For sure. I think I can't remember the specific details of this, but I do remember hearing about some changes in the education system that they were going to make from, I believe it was kindergarten up to the
Right.
12th standard.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, as long as things, change for the better, That's
Yeah.
all that matters. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to do something that you like instead of wanting to do something for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
And speaking of which, how much of it, that aspect of doing what you like, played into the choices you've made?
Certainly a lot. Like it was significant because I do remember having a moment of crisis when I was in my 11th grade, and I was like just questioning everything that was happening. And my mother simply was like, if this is not something that you want to pursue, I don't think you should do that. It's because you only get this once. You only get to do your bachelor's and 18 when you're 18 once. If it's gone, it's gone. So if you don't want to go to an engineering college, or like a if you don't want to pursue medicine, please don't do that. And I realized that she was really, like, supportive at that point. Because as you said, like, a lot of South Asian parents tend to look at science much more superior to arts.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a lot up I did have encouraging parents who were like, please don't do that. We are not going to, like, put you down just because you're choosing something, or we're not going to look you in a different way just because you're choosing a different discourse. So that helped. And once I had that conversation with a lot of people, including you, if you remember that, things change. You don't remember
I
that?
don't remember, but if you
You
can
don't
bring that up, yeah, I don't remember,
No,
but yeah.
yeah, but like I did have that conversation with a lot of people because I was realizing that boarding school, on top of having to do things that I really wasn't enjoying, was a kind of a game changer. And I realized this is not something I wanted to do.
Mm. Speaking of the infamous 11th grade, since we've brought that up quite a
Mhm.
bit, um, so for added context, both Anong and I were studying at this place called Sharda Pre-University College, which was in Udupi, which is a not in the interest of not overcomplicating this. It's a city in coastal India. Let's put it that way, in the south. Um, so that's where we met each other. I was in the 12th grade. Anong was in the 11th. Um, so yeah, first question: how did you end up there?
Um, I still don't remember. I think it was my dad's friend who encouraged him to, like try this. And it kind of seemed like fun, and I wanted to give it a shot. And also, it was much closer to Manipal, and Manipal is the educational destination for all of, you know, Southern Indians. And I thought, why
Right.
not give it a shot? Yeah. And I ended
Mm,
up as SPUC. Yeah.
mm. What were your first thoughts when you saw what you walked into?
That, oh my God. It was so, it was weird. And I say weird because I was very confident about my sexuality, but other people were not. And me being a flamboyant person, it really freaked people out because, given the fact that it's a boarding setting and people didn't know how to react. And of course, there was a lot of homophobia, of course, and other things. But more than that, it was just the fact that people freaked out. They had no clue what was happening, and they really wanted to um, comprehend what was happening.
Mm,
But yeah, I before coming to 12th grade, before coming to the 11th grade, I came from a relatively progressive setup, and people were much more open with certain things and accepting of certain things, which was really difficult for me to find that same space when I came to 11th grade.
mm,
Yeah, so it was slightly weird, but I realized that if I don't have confidence in myself, these people are gonna just, yeah, run
mm,
over me, and uh, that's basically how it started.
mm. Yeah, because I think for a lot of us, well, I can't speak for other people, but if I was to speak for myself, I think what was, I think the more sort of thing that we were trying to comprehend was the fact that we've heard so much about, people being confident about sexuality and sort of being openly
Yeah.
the choices, whatever, like being open about who they are,
Yeah.
right? But when you see it in front of you, I
Yeah.
think it still takes you a moment to sort of let that settle in. At least that's
Yeah.
how I felt personally. Because yeah, because it's very, like, again, like you said, it's not as progressive, and this is not like a slight at the place at all. This is not like, we're not necessarily saying that it's a bad place, because I'm sure people have had good times there too. But
I did. I had amazing times as well. But
yeah,
it did take really 2 years for some people to just wrap their head around what was happening, because when people find someone who's not, aligned in terms of social normality, they freak out.
uh,
They're like, what is this creep doing here? But regardless, I did have quite a bit of fun there. It was, yeah, it was a changing point.
right. And what was it about the place that made it amazing for you, or made it fun in a lot of ways?
Um,
There's good and bad both, because we sort of
yeah,
spoke
yeah.
about it, but
Yeah.
we'll get into
Um,
that later. But yeah.
I kind of want to look at it in a much more critical perspective, because I did realize that um, adulthood can be isolating and toxic, to be honest, but not in a
Mm.
bad way. It's just the fact that it became a fact right there, because um, I had a set of people around me, and without having sexual education, without having mental health education, people went berserk, and they really didn't have a grip over themselves. And regardless of a lot of bullying, it was also the fact that I did find a couple of friends who were like quite encouraging, and a lot of supervisors and professors who were, you know, um, they had an idea of what was happening, and they were like, these are certain ways that you could figure out for yourself. But at the same time, of course, there was a bad side where, like, even though having known that certain people don't fit into societal normalities, people try to oppress it. And I I explored therapy in my period, like when I was there, and therapy worked out really great for me. It just genuinely grounded me to reality and tried to make me more confident and competent, and realize certain things that I otherwise wouldn't have.
Mm. And
So
again, if
yeah.
you're comfortable sharing, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just that I wanted to say it's I know, like, for certain queer kids, boarding school can be a nightmare, but it's also the place where we realize that whole life and life in general is nightmare, and adulthood is a nightmare as well. But like, it prepared me for that, for better or for
Mm.
worse. Yeah.
Mm. And I think that's the major takeaway that one can have, right? The fact that you sort of look at it as a way that it's preparing you for best of a worst, like you said,
Yeah.
for what's to come. Because I think a lot of the times we can sort of go into our own shells of, I guess, being lost is one way of putting it, or sort of not necessarily understanding what's happening. Um, did you have any of those moments in terms of feeling like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I don't know what these people are like. I don't know if I should be around these people. Did you have any of those? And this is not again, just to
Yeah.
sort of mention it, this is not a slide on those people, but
No,
it's
no, of
just,
course not.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
Um,
for you, like, if you could sort of speak on that.
um, I'm just gonna go rogue over here and like try to
Okay.
stick to the question at the same time. It's just that talking about certain traumatic, like experiences from the past is something that I'm still trying to get adjusted to, because that part of my life was not as easy as I wish it would have been. Um, what was more important was that time and again, my guardians who were supposed to be helping me in that place were not quite looking out for me in my best interest. What they were doing it in for their best interest, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a couple of crises about my gender, about my sexuality, about my sex, three different things altogether. Um, just and it was an important point, and it was important for me to know about those things because it was a huge part of who I was. But no one there was equipped to teach that to me or get me the right resources. So I had to find my own therapist, psychiatrist, and like I had to get my own, you know, guidance counselors and people who would help me out. And I just wish that part was easier. When I think about it, I wish that, people around me were equipped with certain education where you wouldn't bully or harass a kid. I was basically a kid. I wasn't even like
Right.
18. I was like 15, no, 16-ish when
Mm-hmm.
when I was there. So, and that can be a lot for a teenager who's just growing up and like is away from like parents and like, so I certainly wish there were resources and people who made it a bit more easier for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes friends as well. Like, of course, I had a couple of supportive friends, but um, when you walk down a hallway in a block and people just don't make you feel comfortable, and that's the place
Mm-hmm.
where you sleep, it can be threatening sometimes. It can be, yeah.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And do you think that, well, this is no slight on the experience that you had, but do you think that because you had to take that extra step and because it wasn't easy in terms of having people around you who could help you or anything like that, now did that help make the person who is talking about it today in a lot of ways, the
Certainly,
fact that you had to go that extra mile?
yeah, certainly. If I like in my knowledge, I think I was the first openly gay person there. There could have been
Mm-hmm.
before me, but like someone who's not out there,
Right.
who's quite open to people about it. So when the counselors and when the other students, when they encountered me, it was quite an experience for them. So when someone asked me like, how much has that helped you discover yourself? Of course, it has helped me, but it's also the fact that I had to sit through multiple counseling sessions just to go. So I wish that, I could have done something else, anything that's alternative to having gone through bullying and,
For sure, 100%.
yeah, yeah,
100%. 100%. You, because nobody wants to go through that experience. Nobody
yeah,
does. Irrespective of where you stand on the spectrum, nobody wants to be bullied. Nobody wants to have to experience that hell, if you will, like if I was to put it that way. But I will say this, like, props to you for being able to come out of that, because it's hard. It's hard to come out. I mean, it's hard to come out of certain things in life, but
yeah.
something as huge as this and
Right.
sort of coming out of that experience. So major props to you. Kudos to you for that.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, I'm sure like through this experience, you've learned how to let go a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I know you don't want to sort of reflect to, or not reflect, but you don't want to sort of rake up old mud, if I was to put it that way. What are some things that helped you let go? Like, I know you sort of mentioned counseling and things like that, but internally, what were some things that helped you let go?
Well, given the fact that it was a small space, um, when a lot of people aren't really your friends or someone you could look up to, I just had to get with my books, like, and I don't even
Mm,
mean the academic, the things that I was meant to study. I was studying like Atwood and like people like that. I was basically doing everything but my studies because I was so scared to think about having to be in a space where everyone around me felt like a threat to me. So
mm,
letting go started with me actually going to KMC, and I was a tenacious person, okay? I was so I stood my ground and I told the people who were, wardens, I made it clear that I really need psychiatric, help. They weren't sure of it because no child ever, and I remember this very specifically. One of the senior counselors said to me, like, no child has ever sought out psychiatric help because psychiatric help for them was something like going crazy, going nuts, like ballistic. And they didn't see that small things need psychiatric evaluation. And when I asked, you know, therapy as part of my, I wanted help from a therapist. They were quite surprised and they were not supportive in the beginning. But I was like, I made sure I needed it. So I called my parents and I told them this is something that I want, but I'm being denied of it. So my parents, I think, had a word with some of the people over there. And then I went to KMC where I then got diagnosed with one of a it was a significant health disorder, a mental health disorder, which took me a couple of years, a lot of counseling, and a lot of medication to get through. S- So the way I let go of certain things, including the maladaptive behavior that I picked up during my medication, was just that I felt so helpless, but I was so stubborn of getting out there by myself. And because I knew after 2 years, those people meant nothing to me, unless, of course, they're in my life. They just genuinely are just random people across the globe. And at that point, my therapist made me realize that I can't hold on to certain things, especially the traumatic events, for a long time because I needed to be a healthier adult and don't have uh, behavior patterns which will be affected because of these 2 years. So I had no other option
Mm.
but to let go.
Mm. It's sort of like it was sort of like you were backed up against the wall, and your only option was to let go and nothing else.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. Because to sort of spin that question up a little, do you feel like, and again, I'm in no way trying to sound like I'm minimizing the things that have happened to you,
No, of
but
course not. Go
do you
on.
think do you think the fact that you were backed up against this wall actually made you come out as a better person?
Yes, it did, but I just wish that it didn't happen at the same time because
Yeah.
I would have been a better person otherwise as well. Like, yeah.
Right, right. Very true.
Yeah. Too much to
Gotcha.
handle for a child. Yeah.
For sure. Especially for a teenager in like their early, like, or towards
Yeah.
like 17, 18. Of course. Yeah. It's a hell of a lot to go through. And just to add a little context in terms of what you were mentioning about the wardens and like health. So basically, the system was that whenever we felt sick, we would ask these wardens to set up appointments for us to where we could go and see the doctor. Because we were in boarding school setups, our parents couldn't come or anything like that. So they would take us, they would have a bus every day or twice a day, I can't remember, that would, excuse me, that would go from the hostel and take kids to like the hospital there, wherever they could get whatever they wanted. So they did, they did have certain ways of weeding out certain problems. Um, like in terms of, okay, if you're sort of like faking it, then they'd be like, no, get out. Like, it's not worth our time sending you there or taking you there or anything like that. Because I remember I had to get a few of these scheduled myself because I had to get like my medical treatment for the arthritis that I had at that time. So they would usually sort of ask you those ton of questions. And I'm sure um, when you went up to them, they were sort of
Mm.
trying to weed it out as like a thing. Oh, yeah, this is where he's just trying to find a way to, not go to class or whatever, or something like that. But how much of it, excuse me, how much of it do you think is just a lack of perspective in their
Um,
case?
Actually, significantly, because they knew that I usually did not miss a lot of classes, you know.
Right.
Um, they knew that I had a good attendance record. and I'm a nerdy person, when it comes to
Right.
that. So um, I would make I would make up in terms of studies when I usually missed classes. But the fact that they were not really aware of certain things in terms of emotional well-being and like non-physical health, it could be anything in terms of sexuality, in terms of just mental health. They were really they blanked out on certain aspects of it, and some of them did try to be supportive, some of them try to be like, of course you can seek out medical attention in terms of this, in terms of that, but at the same time I wouldn't say they were completely supportive as to help me go and find that assistance that I needed. So I feel like part of this you know significant part of this they having to deal with someone who wants to seek medical attention that is not visible, something that's not assessed by them, is mostly because they had little to no you know education in terms of mental health. Because I remember one of the associate caretakers asking me, and they're like, we can't take you to professional mental health assist professional mental health aid unless you have like a absolute breakdown where you are crying and you're on the floor. And I just stood there and I'm like, that is not always how you assess certain things. Like, if you want me to do that, I can do that now right here because I'm a good drama student. But when I'm asking for help, I think I should need it. I need it and I deserve it. And after my therapist, who took significant time to explain to these wardens that I really needed attention and a couple of counseling sessions, and I needed some medicine to sort myself out because I was going through a certain depressive episode because I didn't have nurturing setting around me. And the milieu was quite toxic when it comes to, um, you know, it's just all boys pent up in a small space, and they need to take their anger out on certain somebody or certain some things. And when they run out of things, or when there's always monitoring that's happening by superiors, you have to take it emotionally as well. So I was a scapegoat in some situations, and that wasn't really the best. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and again, to sort of add more context to that, I'm not going to go into details about this, but there were quite a few volatile incidents even when I was there.
Mhm.
Um, Probably not something that the school wants out there, but it has happened. Like there have been situations where things that shouldn't be happening have happened in terms
Right.
of like mass fights or whatever. But um, you mentioned something over there about like just that pent up testosterone within a bit.
Yeah. Right.
um, and you like at the start of the conversation, you mentioned how helpful your mother was in terms of helping you get through things. So to sort of highlight that a little more, how important do you think it is that there is a that how important, or well, before I get into that, how did having a feminine presence in your life that would sort of help out, be it your mother or be it counselors or whoever, whoever helped you, or how did feminine presence help you let go of these things, if I was to put it that way?
Of course, I would not dismiss the fact that there were women, but it's also the fact that regardless of gender, progressive people in my life have tried to push me out of difficult situations.
Mm.
Otherwise, shouldn't have been difficult. Um, and I do feel much, because you said it, and I want to address it. I do feel much safer around women counselors and women therapists. Um, and my mom understood that. Well, basically, I think my family has been quite open and progressive because we've always had those progressive magazines and like things that are open about sexuality, that are open about gender equality, and certain things like that. Um, so when I think about my mother being a feminine person who's present in my life, of course, it helped me talk about certain things that I couldn't with my father. But at the same time, I feel like her being a woman did not play that much of a significant role.
Mm-mm-mm.
While it did, and I would be a fool to dismiss it and not address it. But I also feel like, regardless of gender, I think it's the fact that one should be capable to do certain aspects of parenting, that, you know, you just need to be equipped with certain knowledge and certain skills to have kids, or to even, like, be in a position where you're overlooking kids and you're like monitoring them every day.
Right, right. Um, the reason I asked that question is because there are certain schools of thought that look at, they sort of categorize emotions in being,
Mm.
some of them, some emotions can be categorized as masculine, whereas others can be categorized as feminine.
Yeah.
So like emotions like empathy and sort of understanding and calmness and all those sort of things tend to be associated with feminine emotions,
Right.
um, which is one of the reasons why I asked that. But again, I think based off of what you just said, right, it doesn't, just because you're a man doesn't mean that you can't be empathetic
Mhm.
or just
Yeah.
a decent human being having these emotions.
Yeah, it's basic kindness, which is on top of your jumper right now.
Right.
Kindness is basically very important, and along with kindness thing comes a lot of other things that you would not expect. Because when I think about most of the people that helped me get through these certain difficult situations within the setting, and I feel like all of them were kind, regardless of the gender. Like, all of them were understanding, and they probably did not understand everything, what I was and how I was and what they were dealing with, but they were kind enough to be open about it. Like,
Right.
not shut, not, kind enough to know that there's something happening and I need to pay attention to it, and I need to, acknowledge it before it's just hushed and buried away and then it bursts out. Yeah.
Right. And you make an interesting point over there about people not necessarily understanding everything.
Mm.
To sort of, excuse me, to sort of dig into that a little more, how important do you think it is? This is probably going to be the word understand is probably going to repeat itself a lot in this question, but how important do you think it is for us to understand that there are going to be moments in our life when we don't necessarily understand everything? And that's sort of sub question one, but sub question two would be, how important would it be for the people around us to sort of understand that the person in front of them wouldn't understand everything, and that it's okay for them to not understand as long as they're open enough to sort of trying to understand?
It's a very complicated question
It's
because
very loaded. It is, yeah.
it's it's quite philosophical as well, because when I think about it, a lot of time, we are, especially now because of social media, you realize that we are in the same bubbles. We're in the same social bubbles, because if let's say if you're in uh, there are these parts of TikTok. I don't know if you know about these. There's like gay TikTok, there's this emo TikTok, there's these, basically, the algorithm sorts you out within your circles where content is produced, and you consume that content without having a perfect understanding of what's happening, like elsewhere in the world. Um, because something significant might have happened and you don't know it because you're just shut away, isolated, while not being isolated in the same circle. um, so when it comes to this idea of understanding other people, is basically, first, people need to have space to open up. um, and then, and even when there is space, there needs to be a lot of encouragement. Even though, like, people break out of societal norms and like establish themselves as who they are, um, it would be much more helpful for those people if they found kinder people within those circles and outside of those circles as well. So when we come across people from people of different beliefs, we have to make sure that we first listen to them and at least try to comprehend, even if we can't, just be open to a conversation and open to knowing the fact that people are not all alike. We are significantly different in terms of everything, basically. We might be similar in terms of certain things, but we have more differences. But I think we should try to find ground on the things that we are similar, like that are similar with us, to us, than those that are not.
Yeah,
And the
that's very
best,
well said.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on, please. No, I
No,
was
I
just,
was done. Yeah.
yeah, the best way to do that is to, one, have conversations about everything, including things that you know because you want to clarify it, and including things that you might be, not open about it, but you are willing to be. So as long as we don't have conversations, it just becomes a topic where you don't know about it and I don't want to tell you about it, and there's just a lot of awkwardness in the space, and that doesn't really help human relations or human connections.
Mm. Well, you sort of read my mind because that was going to be my next question in terms of how do you think we can sort of help foster that. But in terms of more, I guess, like sort of giving sexuality the spotlight, how do you think people can be more open, at least from the cultures that we come from, and for kids
Yeah.
in the ages that we were at that time, um, to keep an open mind? Now, it's not something that kids think about. It's not something that I thought about. I wasn't all about, oh, keep an open mind about things when I was 16 or 17. But I'm
I
sure
think
there's certain things that, sorry, just a quick
no,
sort of
no,
addition
no.
there. I think there's certain things that from your upbringing that also sort of play a role. I personally think. Um, so yeah, how do you think people could be more open to sexuality in that age?
It, it starts at home. It really does. I want to
Mm,
say it starts on social media or like anything, but it genuinely starts at home, where you understand gender equality by looking at your parents. If there's, like cisgendered heterosexual couple, you look at them and you see the power dynamics and you realize that, oh yeah, this is what's happening and this is what's happening. If you certainly grew up in a place where there is some approach towards gender equality, if not completely, you would still have this idea that, oh yes, this is how women should be treated because they're women, and this is not how they should be treated. So when you come out of a place and you see someone else mistreating other people because of their identity, you realize that that's not how it should be, because at your home you have been taught and educated that gender and sexuality should not change the way you approach a person or look at a person's, let's say. um, and it also starts with significant changes in our education and curriculum, because there's a genuine lack of sex education, and it's just appalling, because
mhm.
you know that teenagers are just raging hormones, and they're just going around and experimenting with certain things, and if they don't have the knowledge to at least let them know what's good or what's bad. And I don't mean in terms of what's safe. Instead of using good or bad, I would much rather want to use the word what's safe and what's not safe, or what's more at risk, or who's more at risk, or how can that risk be reduced. Because abstinence is not the best solution for anything at all, because if someone's coming to you and asking how should I stop being alcoholic, you can't just say don't stop drinking. That's not going to work. Education is quite important, and that's something that's missing. And I feel like I realized that quite early, because a lot of people in the place where we grew up did not have that education, or were really shy about talking about sex or sexual things. And that led to a lot of, you know, mishaps that shouldn't have happened in their lives and others' lives. And I was, I had a different case, because while growing up, I always try to ask my mom and my dad about certain things. And these questions, when you're young, they're usually hushed down. But like, my mom was quite open about it, and she tried to explain as civic as possible. And she was like, this is how it works, this is how it shouldn't happen, and you have to be safe like this, you don't have to do this, you don't have to go through this, you want to be happy, healthy, and so things like that. So apart from family and apart from education, it also comes with peers, because peer
Mm.
shaming is significant when you're just going through, you know, childhood and adolescence, and peers really tend to be awkward about certain things, and they don't know how to have conversations regarding certain things. And I feel like adults need to make space for that, like, in a healthy way, where people can, where especially younger teenagers who are at risk the most can have conversations about it. Because we know that abortion is a very hot topic right now. And when you look at it, and it's more hot topic because you're in US, and
Yeah.
the whole world is watching you, and Texas
Right.
right now. And like, most of the teenage pregnancies happen when they have no education about it. They don't know what's happening, and they think pulling out is the best way to go with it, or like they are, okay with certain things. But what they don't realize is that it comes with consequences.
Mm.
Yeah. And risks and other things. And all of this can only be avoided in terms of education, and nothing else but that.
Mm.
But if I can ask you, how were you taught your sex education when you were back when, like, when you're doing your secondary high? Like, there wasn't much, was it?
No, there wasn't. And
Yeah.
and a friend and I actually had a conversation about this during that time when I was in like that um, ninth, 10th grade phase.
Hmm.
I remember her clearly saying, it's weird how teachers who are actually supposed to teach us about this themselves are very
Shy about
what's
it.
shy and scared about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that there should be this information that should be coming from them is not coming from them because something mentally is holding them back. And to
Mhm.
sort of use a phrase that I've heard somewhere, there is layers to this. Like I'll have to bleep that out, but there is layers to there's layers to everything. So I'm sure there's maybe a reason why they didn't choose to explain it, but still, I think it's something that everybody should be aware of because the other way that people find out, unfortunately, is through Google or
Yeah.
Pornhub or something like that. And that, unfortunately, is not the best way to learn. It's certainly not because it
I
doesn't.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Adult content can be entertaining for people who are interested, but it's certainly not educational. And
Right,
it, if some, it's almost like you're watching movies and learning things from movies. Of course, there's so much script writing happening, so much takes happening, and there's a lot of expectation that comes out of adult content that's online. And normal bodies don't work like that.
right,
Human bodies are not, everybody can't be an actor, you know what I mean?
right,
And
right.
when you're a growing adolescent person, and especially given the fact that South Asians have so much access to data, internet data, there's so much significant consumption of adult content. And when that happens without education, it's almost like you're basically giving space for mistakes to happen. You're basically giving space for, you know um yeah, sorry, go
Yeah, no,
on.
you're good. You're good. I think some people tend to call it the birds and the bees conversation, in terms
Yeah.
of parents having that talk with their kids. I definitely think if you were to go around and ask Indian dudes my age, um, I hate to say this, but maybe 7 to 8 times out of 10, they probably learned about it more through adult content than they did through their teachers talking about it or their parents talking about it. Not to say that that wasn't there at all, because I'm sure that there have been people who've had experiences where their parents have been openly talking about it and so on. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, there's a very high number of people who probably learn through that more than they learn through actual education and conversation. And to sort of hit on that a little more, this is a phrase that I've heard sometimes within circles, within more conservative circles, as in, oh, people become gay or people
Right.
become lesbian.
It's a choice. Yeah.
Right.
That's what they say.
How?
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Exactly. That's what they say.
yeah. Right.
So, what's the best way to sort of dumb it down and explain it to a person that, firstly, no, it's not necessarily a choice, and secondly, there's layers to this shit. How would
Yeah,
you like sort of dumb it down and explain it to somebody?
yeah. There's layers to this, of course. If I had to dumb it down and explain it to people, it's basically um, it's beyond sexual activity. You know what I mean? It's also
Right.
the fact that I knew I was attracted to Harry more than Hermione when I was like a small, like even before I knew what sex was, right? Like I was more attracted to certain other, people who would have been like adults wouldn't appreciate that even before I knew what sex was. So being queer or being gay, lesbian, intersex, or anything to do with within the gender spectrum and sexuality spectrum is about the fact that people are hardwired to believe that there are two sexes and
Mm.
they both should be attracted to each other, when in fact it's not like that at all. Gender is such a vast topic that we could go on and on about it for days, because scientifically and philosophically gender can never be, you can't get them down to male and female. It's much more than that. Gender is a social identity and an expressive, um, medium for yourself. That's something that we aren't taught.
Mm.
And gender and sexuality are two different things. Sexuality and sex are again different. These things can only be learned when you sit down and you study about them. And I think it's very important that every person does, because it can be quite a journey, even if you don't have to realize at the end that, oh my god, I'm this, I'm that. But having to go through that process can be quite liberating to anybody, in fact, because when you say I'm a man and I need to be only attracted to women, you restrict so much of human emotion. Like, it doesn't even have to be about sex at the end of the day. It's just about human connection. And when that happens, that's very unfortunate. And a lot of people still are like very vehement about not talking about sex and sexuality. But it's a very fluid concept where people can be attracted to other people, and people don't have to necessarily identify as male, female, or you know some people choose to just go with the word queer because it's much more, it used to be a, a slur before, but not anymore, because queer people have, taken that word back, and it's been quite uh, an empowering thing to do. So now people try to identify as queer when they know and they realize that gender and sexuality are such a, you know very versatile things, versatile identities, and they don't need to label themselves. That's also
Mm.
how we are going ahead with the conversation of pronouns. When I say my pronoun is they, them, it's to understand the fact that people, you don't assume pronouns based on how they look, because on some days I know I have a beard, but on other days you're like, no, you're not a man. And so when people tend to tell you and inform you that they have pronouns and this is their gender identity, it's just easier to accept and respect that.
Most certainly. Most
Mm.
certainly. I'd like for you to sort of differentiate the three terms that you just used in sort of explaining all of this, being
Right.
sex, gender, and sexuality. If you could define them briefly. And before you get into that, I just wanted to also add, based off of what you just sort of mentioned, I remember watching a podcast, which I've probably mentioned in the past in previous episodes, called the Charlie and Ben podcast. And I will
Mhm.
preface this by saying that they're not scientists necessarily. They're just two dudes on the internet who do character breakdowns, but on their podcast use their platform to just talk about, like,
Sorry,
get
Charlie.
deep into certain, like, Charlie and Ben. That's the name of the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, in that podcast, there was an episode where I think one of the questions that they got, or a topic of conversation, was to do with sex, like male or female, um, being a spectrum in itself. And the sort of argument, again, I preface this by saying they're not scientists. The argument they were making was that, or at least one of them was that no person is 50, or no person gets exactly 50% of their chromosomes from their dad and exactly 50% of their chromosomes from their mom, and that there will certainly be differences in like chromosome height and all that sort of stuff. I will make sure to find that episode, dig it out, and clip it in the description. That way people of description of this video and audio, that way people can go and check it out for themselves. But it was an interesting argument to sort of say that, you know, it's probably not possible for it to be so 50-50. You know, it's probably 55-45, favoring one side, or so on and so forth, which was interesting, um, as a conversation topic. So yeah, that the conversation of the spectrum that you just talked about too sort of reminded me of that. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll share it down below too. But yeah, going back to my question, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
No, no,
um
again,
Please
just
define. Yeah,
before
go
you
ahead.
before we go with this question, I want to get back to Charlie and Ben, where it's not always about science and scientific approach. It's
Right.
not. It's also about, as I said before, gender identity is a medium to express yourself, because we live in a society at the end of the day. When you wear a frock and you go in the public, I wear skirts on some days and people look at me very differently. And it's got nothing to do with my sex. It's got everything to do with the fact that they have been conditioned to think that skirts are not meant for men.
Mm.
So I know how people try to link it with science and chromosomes and whatnot, and uh, but it's also at the end of the day, it's just about liberation. It's just that you don't have to be a woman to wear skirts. I don't think there's a scientific explanation for that, and I hope to God
Right.
there's not, because oh yeah, it's just that a lot of people bring up science, and unfortunately a lot of I hear a lot of conservative philosophers from US trying to bring up these scientific facts and scientific findings where they're like genders this, genders that. It's not. You're talking about sex, which is more to do with biology, and gender is more to do with your expression within society, which is two different things. And I think this connects back to your question: what is the difference between gender, sex, and sexuality? And I really recommend you to go and check this one uh, Netflix original. It's called Sex Education.
Okay.
It's a marvelous show. I promise you, it's entertaining, it's very educational, and it's quite it's got amazing screenwriting and amazing actors, and I really feel like you should check it out. The third season came out yesterday, and I was so so happy about it, and I binged through the whole thing. I, my roommates, and we all sat and like, yeah. But basically, it's it's just that there are people who are trying to bring out the fact that it doesn't always necessarily have to do with science.
Hmm.
It's it's social as well, because yes, at the end of the day, you can go and try to bring in scientific arguments, but no scientific argument will either advocate or go against the fact that I have nail paint right now, but when I go out, I'm still looked down at because I have nail paint, or like just basically that, yeah.
Hmm. This may come across as slightly a rhetorical question, um, but do you think, like you said, there is definitely there is a difference in terms of sex and gender, and
Right.
like you said, gender is more of a way of a person expressing themselves. Do you feel the fact that gender is explained this way fuels that argument for some people? Now, I understand the distinction, but or I've learned the distinction. Let's put it that way. Do you think that people who don't necessarily understand or don't necessarily see or are close-minded use this argument of it being a way to express to sort of connect back to that question of, oh, they choose to do it that way?
Yes, again, I think gender over there is completely different from sexuality.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's sort of yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which it's a different thing. Um, I could be gender fluid person and still be, like not gay, or like I could be asexual as well. So when people are trying to bring in the fact that it's a choice, it's mostly, I don't know, I feel like I need to bring up this Tumblr code back and again, where it's like there's so much homosexual activity happening in Animal Kingdom, and you still
Mm,
think it's a choice when it comes to humans. That just doesn't make sense. And like when people try to argue that it's so unnatural, and I'm like, no, of course it's not.
right.
Meme face, yeah, but like, but I kind of get where you're coming from when it comes to it being a choice. It's just that um it's one of the things, it's an opinion that which comes out when you don't have education, or like
Right.
when you lack, knowledge in terms of certain new topics. um but I think we are, like, we can find more progressive people today who accept the fact that it's not always the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
um but I really don't know how to tackle people who say it's a choice, because I usually, what I do when I you have no clue, I get about like 10 messages from different people online, where they bash me for the things I do, think clothes I wear, or like the life I live, even though they haven't met me in real life, or like I
Right.
haven't come across them in like ages. They're like, we studied together, I don't like what you're doing right now. And I'm like, okay, don't watch things that I do. Just, you can always tend to ignore it, because I feel like I was at some point I was that person who used to argue with strangers online, where they're like, no, we need our rights, kind of thing. But I also realized that it has significant influence on my health, on my schedule, and I can't be bothered to write to 10 people on the same day, where I'm like, no, go ahead, just educate yourself, damn it, that's it.
Mm. And definitely, that's a major takeaway, right? Is to sort of educate yourself. Um, you saying that, like 10 people who don't necessarily have much to do with your life still reaching out to you and telling you things that you shouldn't be doing.
Can I
Yeah,
tell
go
a
ahead.
funny anecdote? Can I tell a funny anecdote? Oh my god, this is so
Please
funny.
do. Please
This is,
do. Please do.
I'm not gonna name anyone, but like a dude from where we study together. Um, that person sent me a message on Instagram, and I'm like, I don't remember who they were. I was like, I was trying to be kind. I was trying to be like, hey, what's up? And so after a certain point, it got a bit abusive and it got a bit like, hey, and explicit. And at that point, I realized that this is not a good place for me to have this conversation. So I immediately went and blocked them and I removed them and all that stuff. The person made two more accounts on Instagram, came and talked to me about how the things I'm doing is so wrong. And then I removed them as well. I found Twitter messages from multiple accounts, and I found so many messages on my Facebook account. When I opened them, it was so hilarious to see someone freak out just because you're wearing skirts. It's just very funny to me. I know it's not supposed to be funny, but it's very depressing and
No,
like
no, I get it. No, I get it. I see the funny side of it too, but at the same time, it makes me question the priorities that we have as people.
I know. Yeah, that's exactly the point. It's just that you have been hard conditioned to believe, and you will go out of your way, take significant time to establish the fact that you believe in certain things that will discredit the other person's identity. I find it very funny, yes, but also just pathetic at certain point. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because the amount of time and
But
energy it. Go ahead.
yeah. No, having said that, I have also gotten multiple messages from people who we've studied together where they're like, I'm so proud that you've done this because you opened up conversations about certain things I didn't even know exist. And now I'm certainly comfortable with people of different sexualities. And even some people have come out to me and they're like, this is, you know, um, and you will not believe there are so many queer people around you, but they just aren't comfortable enough to share it with you. I think I read it the other day. 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 American identify themselves as a queer, the LGBTQI community.
Hmm. You were sort of cutting out there. Maybe there's some internet issues, but basically, I think you just said that 1 of 3 or 1 of 4 people are like sort of
Yeah,
they
it's an
identify.
American study where yeah, identify themselves as someone who belongs to the LGBTQ plus community.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it goes back to that, right? It goes back to being open minded and having, or being open enough to sort of educate yourself and learn about the possibilities that exist in terms of sex, gender, or um, sexuality. And I think the other sort of thing that we tend to forget a lot is that at the end of the day, we have our own lives to live. And, if we're going to get offended or angry about something that somebody else is doing, you are losing the energy that you could use to make your life better. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a saint and I've done everything right. Sure, I've had those phases of my life as well, but I think it's sort of understanding that too, right? Like, and this is not to sort of discredit this or like sort of hit on this person who did what they did, like in terms of making multiple accounts and trying to reach out to you. But I think at the end of the day, like even if you find it hard to wrap around your head, at the end of the day, it comes to about just being open enough and also being accepting of the fact that sometimes you're not going to know everything, right? How much of
That's
that
true.
is
Yeah.
how much of that is important, do you
Yeah.
think, is to understand that you don't know everything? Because I feel like that also sort of creates this mentality of, oh no, this is how it should be, this is what I read, or no, you're
Mm,
wrong. And that's and
yeah.
it's not just with this conversation that we're having, it's with almost everything in this world, unfortunately. So to sort of taper this conversation off and head into the word association game, before we get into that, how important do you think it is
Mhm.
for us to understand that concept of the fact that we're not going to know everything, and that's okay,
Yeah.
and there's room
No,
for
I
us to
agree.
learn?
No, it's absolutely right. What you're saying right now is something that I completely agree with, because every day we learn something new. We experience something new. It's an uncharted territory as we go. Um, if we, restrict ourselves from experiencing and exploring things, um, it's just your loss. People are out there having fun, or like, exploring and enjoying themselves. Like right now, I'm not even thinking about that person, but I'm pretty sure at some point this week they might have thought about me. They're like, how damn dare that person live their life. Um, so instead of that energy where you put towards bullying, I feel like if people chose to understand new things, educate themselves, and explore, it'll be a much easier and convenient life for themselves and the people around them. Yeah.
Very well said. That's a great way to cap this off. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions and sort of being open enough to talk about it. I really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, I
Um,
loved it. Yeah, it was my pleasure. It was really
yeah.
fun.
So we're gonna head into the word association game that I call Bish Bash Bosh. Where basically I give you one word and you have to,
Mhm.
or well, I give you five different words. And for
Right,
each word, you have to respond to them in three words or in three phrases. So for
right.
example, if I was to say school, what are the three things that sort of come to your mind? That sort of thing. And it'll be one word at a time.
Okay.
So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. So you give me a word and I say three words or three phrases about that word, whatever comes in my mind.
Right. The first things I'm sort of calling out to you as I say that word.
Reminds me of
Um,
Carl Jung. Are we doing Freudian things over here? Go on.
well, I don't know. Maybe we are. The first word is differences.
Differences. Empathy, culture, and love.
Beautiful. The second word is nuance.
Nuance. Um, Intricate. I know it's kind of like a synonym, but intricate. Uh, oh my God, I'm blanking. I'm a literature student.
Take your time.
Nuance.
It's okay.
Intricate knowledge and discourse.
Mm. The third word is learning.
Learning. Um, Open-minded. Damn, I didn't know this was going to be so hard. Open-minded. Um,
It's okay. Take your time. Whatever is sort of calling out to you in your head. You don't have to be selective about the words coming to you.
the learning.
Yeah.
Open-minded, university, and friendships.
Okay. The fourth word, and you've already mentioned one of this words, is empathy. What are the three things calling out to you when I say the word empathy?
Um, Empathy would be relationships, which is, I would say, human connection, society, and I want to use the word differences here. Yeah.
Nice. I like the sort of connection of the dots there. Uh, and the last word for this segment is similarities.
Similarities. Um, Similarities. What would I say? Embrace.
Mhm.
Open conversations.
Mhm.
And life.
Wonderful. That's a great way to close this off. Thank you so much for playing along in that segment, Anong. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Well, actually, there's another question I wanted to ask you before we head into the two usual questions I ask every guest at this point. The first question or not the first question, but that other question I was going to ask was, if you were to recommend a few readers that people should reach out or like seek out the work, because you mentioned that you like study a lot of these writers. If you could recommend like a couple of them and some of the work that they've done, if you could share that for us, if you don't mind.
Oh, in terms of gender and sexuality, or in terms of what I study?
Anything, whatever you study, whatever you find interesting of the people that you like study about.
So I think when it comes to gender, I really feel like Butler is someone who's leading the discourse right now, and I find them very interesting. So the authors, the text that I really find interesting is called "Bodies That Matter."
Okay.
Yeah, it's by Judith Butler. Okay, then there is this book that I really want to study. I'm actually studying right now, and I've been like enjoying every moment of it. It's an autobiography which was written by a subaltern woman. It's called The Life of Veerama. Sorry, Veerama, The Life of Untouchable. Okay, it's by Veerama, Jacine Racine, and Jean-Jacques Racine. I think it's translated from French to English by. Okay, yeah, I think it was translated from French to English. One other book that I would really recommend is reading Ismat Chugtai. Any work by Ismat Chugtai. I really love the writer. That's pretty much. But I really recommend that people watch Sex Education. It's really important because they have understood the idea of human body and human sexuality, and it's a very well written show. Yeah.
Awesome.
I could send two other book names for you through email, and you could just add them in your,
For sure. Yeah, I can
yeah,
add that into the description of this episode for sure. To go into the second last question of this podcast, how do you relate to people?
How do I relate to people? Um, how do I relate to people? How? Like to people
This can
around
mean
me, or
anything. Like this
yeah.
can mean anything, and I leave it open to interpretation. So
Mm. So just to be, like quickly wrap it up. Even though those years were something that wasn't, fruitful, and I would like to remember, but what happened during my childhood and my adolescence has changed the way I look at people and think about certain things. And one of the major things I have developed is to understand that all of us have our own lives, you know like after this podcast, you're probably in a different time zone, and I'm in a different country, different time zone, and we're working our things and living our life. The best way to find those human connections is to just making things a little bit better for everybody around us, including ourselves. Just leave it a little bit better than how you found it.
mm, you've probably answered my next question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. If you could mention something else, um,
Right.
but usually I give this last bit for the guest to sort of leave a positive thought or quote or message that keeps them going every day, to sort of share that with the people who are listening and watching. So, if you'd like to share something that you haven't already mentioned, um, please feel free to do so.
I would just say there's always something to look out for in life. Like there really is sometimes, especially after 2020 and 2021, what I have realized personally is that certain days can be really, I wake up and there's no motivation to do anything at all. but I always tend to do what I tend to do is I look out for certain something. You know, it could be an aspiration, it could be an interest, it could be a hobby, it could be basic as simple as cooking, as I've told you. It's just these things keep me going. It doesn't have to be something grand, philosophical, or like, very intellectual. It could just be the fact that life is up and down. This may be a down, this may be a up. You just have to be prepared for what comes next. That's it.
Awesome. That's a great way to sort of cap this conversation. Thank you so much, Anong, for taking the time to do this. Once again, I really appreciate you sharing everything that you have and sort of, giving me some information that I probably wasn't aware of, and everybody else who's probably listening and watching too. So thank you so much. And yeah, for everybody who's listening and watching, we will see you guys next time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really love being here. I just hope people find, like platforms like these where they want to understand new things for themselves and for people around in their circles. It's a great initiative. And you're doing it so well, and I loved it. I've watched a couple of previous episodes, and they're so fun. Good luck with the future.
Thank you, Anong. I appreciate it. Thank you for watching this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek featuring Anong. Make sure to mention in the comment section below some things that you found interesting, intriguing, or relatable about this conversation. Make sure to also check the description box below for other sources of information and content that we've talked about today. If you like this conversation, make sure to hit the like button, make sure to share it around, and make sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon to never miss another episode. Thank you so much once again for being a part of this platoon of perspectives. If I think about it now, I'm 40 episodes in, and it's wild to think that I've been able to do all this, and it wouldn't be possible without all of you. I don't know if there's anybody watching this part of the podcast, but if you are, please reach out to me. I would sincerely love to thank you for listening to the entire thing. So, thank you for just being a part of this, for hearing stories that people like Anong have to share. So, yeah, that's all I have to say at the end of this episode. Is thank you from the bottom of my heart. Excuse me. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and don't forget to keep your mind open to different perspectives. Because you never know, random relatability might just be around the corner.